They disinvited me from Thanksgiving to keep my sister comfortable. So I canceled the heating oil contract and let Winter explain what silence really feels like. With a warm cup of tea in one hand and an old magazine I purchased from the thrift store on the corner in the other, I'm leaning back on the chair. My small apartment on the outskirts of Minneapolis is filled with the smell of early November. The leaden gray sky outside the window is oddly quiet, as if it were attempting to push snow onto the ground. The beautiful silence is broken by the unexpected ringing of the phone. I look at the screen. Dad. For a moment, I gasped for air. Without giving myself any hope, I pressed the speaker button. His tone is casual, as though he were chatting about getting extra toilet paper. Claire, you don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year, he adds. I thought for a moment that I had misheard. I'm sorry, what? Without pausing, he goes on. We just think it's better if you stayed put, as if he had practiced it in his mind to maintain harmony. Sierra's been a bit on edge lately, you know? The teacup was placed on the table by me. When porcelain strikes wood, the sound is dry and harsh. Sierra once more. My sister, Sierra, the princess who was never held accountable for anything. To make her feel at ease, the entire family holds their breath whenever there is an issue. So what you're saying is, I'm not invited just because Sierra gets tense. Even though my throat feels constricted, I strive to remain composed as I enunciate each syllable. My father sighs, his trademark sigh, which implies, don't make this a big deal. It's just one day, Claire. You'll be fine. The wood beneath the chair creaks in protest as I leap out of it. Just one day, I say again, my voice as icy as the porch frost. You say that after I've sent over $5,700 to the house since January, just to keep the furnace running through winter? On the other end, there was silence. All that could be heard between us was the soft hum of the phone line. Don't bring money into this, he says at the end, sounding a little nervous. You offered to help. My chuckle reverberates through the empty room, dry and hollow. Offered, who paid it right away when the heating bill went up in January, and you called at midnight to complain the home was freezing. I did. Who contacted the repairman when Mom sobbed in March over the clanking furnace. Me again. And I was still responsible for paying for the fall heating oil in September after Sierra spent the majority of her savings on her podcast plan. He doesn't dispute it, simply returns to the same stale line. Family is family, Claire. But this time, Sierra really needs calm. She's been through a lot. Through the foggy window, I gaze out. Little flakes of snow are softly covering the walkway as it starts to fall. Even though I've experienced a lot, I was never accorded that level of importance. Although he makes an effort to speak evenly, I can sense his irritation slipping in. Don't make this awkward. It's not personal. With my fingers grabbing the table's edge, I inhale deeply. So don't count on me to give you another cent this winter. Don't treat me like I'm a member of the family if I'm not. Before he can reply, I end the call, the screen turning as black as my eyes at this moment. The snow continues to fall outside. It's chilly and quiet, but not any quieter than the room I'm in. With my hands gripped together and my mind jumbled like the old cables in the kitchen drawer, I collapse onto the side of the bed. Like a broken tape, that little phone conversation keeps playing again in my head. They actually pulled me out of Thanksgiving as casually as they would have canceled a dentist visit. I glance at the little picture on the shelf. My dad and I during Thanksgiving in 2019. I took a bus home only to sit at the table, eat Mom's roast chicken, and listen to Dad vent about his team losing, even though I had just begun my first work at the shipping firm, which paid little and required long shifts. Now, that warmth seems like a relic from the past. I stand up, move over to the desk, and turn on my laptop. Outside, a cold and piercing wind whips through the old window frame. I open the account for utility payments. Last winter, after Mom sobbed over the phone, I put up one for them since they couldn't afford heating oil, and it was extremely cold. It was me who made the monthly calls to the oil company. All of the bills were paid by me, just for heating, every dollar. more than $3,200 last year and $5,700 this year. I did it because I felt it was the proper thing to do, not because anyone asked me to. I used to think there were no restrictions on helping family members get through difficult times, until I turned into the extra component. I opened the Excel document in which I discreetly recorded each transfer. 10 months earlier, $500 was provided before the cold, so they wouldn't worry, according to the last entry. Do they even recall, I wonder? In just 4 months, I saw my sister, Sierra, spend about $17,500 of my parents' savings before she ordered more than 1,000 candles from a Texas mass production facility, added a handmade label, and believed she could sell them for 3 times the price. Her artisanal candle business sounded like an artsy venture. They were not purchased. The garage was overflowing with inventory. But rather than reprimanding her or holding her responsible, my parents simply shook their heads and remarked, "She's young. Everyone makes mistakes." I said nothing at all, just sent them more cash covertly to get them through the winter. Sierra continued to share photos on Instagram in the meanwhile, including breakfasts with friends wearing the newest Zara coat and $7 lattes at retro cafes. My hand, already weary from a 10-hour loading job, would always drift to my back as I scrolled past one. I nearly texted to find out why, but then it occurred to me that perhaps I will never fully comprehend or accept it. The cursor was blinking over the Cancel Service button when I went back to the screen. Beginning the following month, the system will stop making automatic payments with a single click. I sit for a long time in silence. I'm allowing myself to recall what it was like to matter to them, not because I'm unsure. Then I make a click. A notification appears. 4 weeks prior to Thanksgiving, on November 2nd, service will conclude. I go to the window after shutting down the laptop. Now the snow is falling, each flake as light as the words my father said on the telephone. However, snow can freeze an entire house if it falls for a long enough period of time. They'll be aware. Not immediately, though. Sierra will continue to think that she is the center of the universe. While preparing dinner, Mom will attempt to ignore it until her fingers become numb. And as usual, Dad will become irate. He can't, however, dispute that he was the one who instructed me to remain where I was. I feel empty inside, like I've just let go of something significant. The part that woke me up the third time I had to decide between sending money home or buying a new coat, however, felt lighter. I'm speaking out for myself for the first time in a long time. At least I'm not the one who is shivering due to someone else's choice, even if I know this winter will be long. Sleep hasn't felt calm since that call, so I started getting up earlier. Not because my job changed. I felt like I was walking a tightrope in the days following my parents' heating service cancellation. Half relief, part uncertainty. However, I always recall why I did it when I get out of bed in the morning and my feet hit the chilly floor of my tiny but serene apartment. The system formally sent confirmation on November 2nd. The residents located at 422 Elm Street had their heating oil service canceled. With the small space heater buzzing constantly at my feet, a silent form of comfort I had purchased for myself, piece by piece, via each additional shift, I read the message while drinking coffee in the kitchen. The snowfall that day was exceptionally heavy. Although it was already frigid in Minneapolis, winter seemed to come a few weeks earlier this year. The 2-story home where I grew up, with its small glass windows and old shingles, sprang to mind. After just one night without heat, the cold could seep in. The image of them wrapped up in winter clothes made me unhappy. I didn't feel bad, though. They needed to realize that being kind isn't a duty, especially when it's taken for granted. Mom sent the first message 4 days later. "Claire, the heating system seems to be acting up. Can you check it for me?" I put my phone down after staring at the message. I didn't respond. I received an SMS from Sierra that night. Only a single line. How immature. As usual, there was no greeting, no inquiry, only judgment. She most likely expected me to respond, rush to clarify, or perhaps even offer an apology. But I just put my phone on silent. Dad called on the seventh day. I waited for it to cease ringing on its own. After 3 minutes, a voicemail appeared. Claire, I don't know what's going on. The house is down to 58 degrees. If you know anything, call me. His tone was piercing, a mixture of worry and rage. The voicemail went unheard. I went to the Lake Street bookstore instead, purchased a new book, and spent hours sitting in the cafe next door, where the aroma of warm cinnamon waffles permeated the air and the heating roared. I gave myself permission to enjoy something I had always put off, personal time. I received a call from an unidentified number on the 10th day. It was the supplier of heating oil. Hi, is this Miss Claire? Are you planning to renew service for the house at 422 Elm Street? We haven't heard back from the homeowners, and the previous contract was under your name. I gave a clear response. No, the contract was canceled and will not be renewed. I'm no longer responsible for that house. The representative answered, I see, with a little hesitation. So just to confirm, you're not intending to continue payments. The street was covered with sluggish snowflakes when I peered out the window. That's correct. The messages began to arrive in quick succession on November 14th. Mom. Claire, it's only 50 degrees in the house. Your dad refuses to wear a heavy coat, and Sierra's been coughing all day. Can you please call me? Dad. This isn't about money anymore. This is family. Sierra, more resentful this time. Fine. Just pretend you were never part of this family. Every message was read by me. Didn't remove them. Didn't respond. I simply kept them as a record of the times I poured all out and the things I received in return. The season's first snowstorm struck Minneapolis on the 16th day. Everyone was told to stay indoors via news alerts. Power was momentarily cut off in some places. I had a large blanket wrapped around a mug of hot cocoa while I sat by the window. Beside me, the heater buzzed steadily. Outside, the city was filled with howling winds. I wondered if they were all gathered in the living room, covered with all of their blankets. Were they considering me as the person who had subtly kept that house warm for the previous 2 winters, rather than simply a transfer of funds? Perhaps not, but that was no longer what I was waiting for. Setting my phone aside, I opened the first page of my new novel and drew the armchair closer to the heating. The first line caused my eyes to pause. You can't warm a place where they always saw you as the cold wind. I grinned as well. With every drop on the thermometer since the heating was turned off, my family sent me more messages. I was able to guess their contents without having to look at my phone. They all had the same tone: blame, hurry, and occasionally desperation. Mom sent the first SMS on November 17th. Claire, it's 54 degrees in the house. Your dad keeps coughing and refuses to take medicine. Can you help? Call someone. After reading the message, I put the phone on the kitchen counter. Face down, a pot of potato and celery soup boiled on the stove, filling the tiny kitchen with its heady perfume. With the heat fogging up the window panes, I stirred steadily. The temperature outside dropped to 25 degrees Fahrenheit that afternoon. With wind whipping against the rooftops, the snowstorm hit sooner than anticipated. However, it was peaceful and toasty inside my tiny flat. I poured a cup of cinnamon tea, put on my favorite sweater, and turned on the oven for added warmth. I knew they were layering garments, turning up a thermostat that was disconnected from everything, and removing every thin blanket in the home somewhere else. Dad called 12 times on November 19th. Not a single one was picked up by me. This was followed by a brief but directive message. Call me back. This isn't a joke. I laughed dryly. I remained the submissive daughter to them, the one that takes place behind the scenes, the one who took care of things. They failed to remember that even goodwill has its boundaries. Sierra shared a story on social media that same day. An image of her feet wearing thick socks with the following description: cold enough to feel like we live in a freezer. I simply scrolled by. I felt no sympathy. It wasn't hilarious to me. I simply believed it to be true. They had taken up residence in a freezer. They had closed their minds to the present. For Sierra's comfort, they called and told me to stay put. Mom called again on November 21st, her voice choking. "Claire, it's down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit in the house. Your dad's sleeping in a winter coat. My hands are so numb, I can't even do the dishes. Can you do something?" I was preparing dinner, which was grilled cheese. The smell of golden, sizzling butter filled the room as the oven flared orange. I didn't respond. I ate in silence that night, with the crunch of each meal sometimes broken by the buzz of messages. Every time my phone vibrated, I took a quick look, a habit I developed over the previous week, and then resumed eating. I wasn't happy that they were in pain, but I also wasn't depressed. After years of being viewed as the financial backup without requiring permission, I was just living within the parameters I had established. 2 days prior to Thanksgiving, on November 23rd, I was cutting onions when I was interrupted by a message from Dad. "Claire, if you still consider yourself part of this family, now's the time to prove it." I put down the knife and turned to face the window. Snow covered the neighbors' automobiles and the porch outside. I closed my eyes and visualized the old house where I had wrapped my first Christmas present and learned to ride a bike, sitting quietly and icily. However, I no longer recognized myself in that image. I filled the teapot with extra hot water. Sierra, who previously told me I was useless for not supporting her local fashion magazine concept last year, came to mind as the steam rose. Regarding Dad, when I said that I was consistently left out of family gatherings, he told me to stop being so sensitive. About Mom, who in an effort to maintain harmony, never spoke when I was dismissed. My silence was long enough. I read a novel while cuddled up on the couch that evening, wrapped in the light fleece blanket I had purchased the previous year. A single lamp provided adequate but weak illumination for the space. Warm, calm, my phone continued to ring. I haven't responded yet, because sometimes the only way for others to see how valuable you are is to simply vanish from the location where they always thought you would be. I got out of bed before the sun rose on Thanksgiving morning. Thin white drapes let in the weak light. Outside, the city was eerily quiet, and the steps were covered in snow. No automobiles, not a voice. A soothing reminder that winter had taken over everywhere was the sound of the wind whispering over rooftops. I made myself a modest breakfast of peanut butter, crispy toast, and a juicy orange after turning on the coffee machine. The turkey wasn't prepared by me. Mom used to prepare mashed potatoes, but I didn't. Nothing that brought to mind the old kitchen, where the three of us used to cram ourselves during the holidays, was what I wanted. I decided on simplicity this year, not because I was lacking anything, but rather because I was tired of acting like nothing had changed. I was sitting on the couch at 10 in the morning, with a blanket over my head, a steaming cup of coffee in my hand, and my feet extended to the edge of the table. The TV was showing a documentary that I really enjoyed. I nearly forgot about the emotional upheaval of the previous 2 weeks, since everything felt so calm. Then the doorbell rang, piercing and demanding. Even before I entered the corridor, I knew who it was. I was not shocked to see the familiar figure as I peered through the peephole. A heavy coat of gray. Frustrated and cold, cheeks burning, I could still see the same expression in their eyes that I had known since I was a child. Expectation, rather than apology. Warm air poured out of the door as I barely cracked it, striking my father's thin face. He whispered, "Claire," as he exhaled in faint clouds. "We need to talk." With my hand still on the handle, I leaned against the doorframe. "I don't think today's the right day to talk." Flatly, "You cut the heat," he said. "The house is freezing. Your mom's sick. Sierra's, she's locked herself upstairs. It's 38 degrees in there." I maintained eye contact with him. I simply stopped making payments. I didn't reduce anything. Those two things are not the same. He scowled. "The contract was in your name, and you are aware of our lack of technical expertise. Since it was never in your name in the first place, the company failed to tell us when you canceled." I uttered, Over $9,000 was handled by me over a 2-year period. I was then removed from dinner after just one call in order to keep Sierra from being offended. Perhaps you should take care of the rest immediately. He winced, as if he hadn't thought I would recall every number. However, I recalled each bill. I missed every meal in order to send money. I waited in the snow at the bus station every morning in order to go to work on time. Claire, stay calm and don't make this more complicated than it is, he added. This is all just a misunderstanding. It's just been a tough year. Sierra's been through a lot. I let out a sigh. Sierra puts herself there. So she's been through a lot, Dad. The one that is pushed out is me. When she spent all of her savings on a creative academy and then dropped it after 2 months, I said nothing. When she borrowed money and vanished, I said nothing. However, that was it when I was denied a family supper due to her fragility. No more. For a few seconds, he stood silently. Then he lowered his voice and gave a small shake of his head. Claire, we've sold almost everything of value. Therefore, we're broke. We are unable to pay the upfront amount, even though I called the heating business. We can't wait much longer because your mom has a fever. I didn't move, even though I could feel the cold leaking through the broken door. You advised me to remain behind in order to maintain harmony. For Sierra, that's exactly what I did. I stayed behind. Regarding peace, I've found mine. I'm not sure about yours. His eyes narrowed as he clutched the edge of his hood. You're punishing the whole family over one sentence said in frustration. I slightly widened the door so he could see the warm apartment behind me. The kitchen is ablaze. The table was arranged neatly. The heater in the corner was humming quietly. I whispered, "It's not punishment. It's just letting you feel the cost of pushing someone aside when you no longer need them." He looked at me for a while. Then, with his footsteps crunching in the snow, he turned and left. I shut the door. The crisp, solid sound of the lock snapping into position. The snow continued to fall outside. As I poured myself another cup of coffee inside, I noticed that, for the first time in years, I was no longer shaking. Nina, my cousin from southern Minnesota, called me the week after Thanksgiving. Despite not being close to Sierra, she was one of the few relatives who continued to stay in touch with me. Amidst the sound of the wind, roaring against her window, her voice could be clearly heard over the speaker. Nina started off by saying, "I just talked to Aunt Claire without holding back. Things at your house are worse than I thought." With a steaming cup of ginger tea in my hand, I sat down at the dining table and watched the fog rise on the window pane. "Adding Sierra's moved out," Nina said. "Her new boyfriend just broke up with her. She only stayed for a few days at her best friend's house after she crashed there. She's currently in Eden Prairie, sleeping on someone's couch." It didn't surprise me. Everything always seemed to revolve around Sierra until nobody was there to do so. At last, the love she had depended upon throughout her life had dispersed with the chilly breeze. Calmly, I said, "What about my parents?" "Aunt is lodging at a roadside motel close to Highway 52. It's incredibly inexpensive, the type that people rent on a weekly basis, and the walls are as thin as paper. I've been informed that she has a slight case of pneumonia. And your father?" Nina sighed after hesitating. "He purchased some temporary heating oil by selling Grandpa's antique watch collection. However, it will end after a few days." Gently, I gripped the teacup tighter. All my grandfather had left was that collection of watches. It was being advertised online like things no one even wanted to haggle for, after once being showcased as a jewel in the living room's glass cabinet. Sensing my prolonged pause, Nina gently inquired, "You okay, Claire?" "I'm okay," I answered, just a little sad about how it all ended. Nina stated, "I'm not," in a firmer tone. "I believe you made the correct decision. It's not family if people only turn to you when they're in need. That is taking advantage of you." Before hanging up, we continued our conversation. My face was reflected in the kitchen light as I gazed at the phone in my hand, its screen now dark. Not pleased, not upset, just the icy clarity of someone who had finally stopped, not because they were worn out, but because they had come to the realization that they owed no one anything. Over the next few days, I reverted to my usual routine. Coffee in the mornings. The distribution center is open from 7 to 3 p.m. Visit the neighborhood market in the afternoon to purchase fresh produce and freshly baked goods. Reading, listening to vintage jazz albums, and sometimes calling Nina to hear tales from people beyond the family circle occupied the evenings. I didn't hear anything else from Mom, Dad, or Sierra. When Dad arrived at my door, the messages had ceased. A local real estate website now has the old Ashwood Street house for sale. Nina stated that even though winter had barely begun, they couldn't afford to retain it. I occasionally had dreams about returning to that former kitchen, the one where pumpkin pies were baked by Mom, where I completed my high school assignments, where each day Dad spread the morning paper on the table. However, the kitchen was dark, chilly, and empty in the dream. I simply stood silently, glanced around, and then softly shut the door. Sincerely, I wasn't upset with them. However, I also stopped feeling sorry for them. Perhaps because I had also been chilly and alone in the end. However, I had discovered how to get up and start a fire for myself. Early in December, Nina made another call one evening. Her voice was a mix of frustration and laughter. "Claire, you won't believe this. Sierra's on the internet telling some sob story about being abandoned by family, like you're the cruelest person alive." I arched an eyebrow. "She did what?" "I posted a video in which you sobbed and said that you had to leave your family during a crisis, but not a word about how they denied you Thanksgiving or about all the money you spent." I smiled a little, without resentment, and laughed. My words were "let her talk." What people want to believe, they will believe. I am no longer required to prove anything. Nina let out a big laugh. "I adore you in this form. Firm. Unwavering. You truly inspire me." I fixed myself a cup of hot cocoa after the call. Under the street lamp's comforting warmth, I sat by the window and watched the snow fall gradually. The outside world remained hard and frigid. However, I had figured out how to stay warm. From basic items, from well-defined borders, and from realizing that sometimes you have to leave and never return in order to live in peace. The little balcony where I kept a dried lavender pot was covered in a heavy layer of fluffy snow that afternoon. In the bitter cold of -4 degrees, the city was quiet. Unless it was absolutely required, nobody ventured outside. The doorbell rang when I was folding a wool scarf that had just been laundered. I initially believed it to be a delivery. However, a steady, timid knock followed, which caused me to halt. Going to the door, I peered through the spy hole. Mom. She was standing there with a wool scarf over her neck and a big coat that almost buried her face. Her helmet and shoulders were covered in snow. Her shoes were buried deep in the snow, and she had an ancient handbag that looked both worn and strange. After a few seconds of hesitation, I opened the door, creating a small space between us. "Claire," my mother whispered quietly, her voice shaking, though I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or something else. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced, but I didn't know how much longer I could wait." I stood back, leaning against the doorframe. "Why are you here, in this weather?" She took a deep breath and then coughed quietly. "I took the bus," she said. "It took over an hour to walk the remaining distance. However, I hoped that this time you would listen to me." I waited silently without saying anything. Thanksgiving has been on my mind a lot, roughly every previous winter. With her eyes fixed on the tiled doorstep where the snow had begun to turn to water, she gripped the bag tighter, and I saw that I was mistaken, not only for my words that day. However, I allowed you to carry everything for all the years and handled it as though it were normal. I cocked my head a bit. I saw my mother without the mask of strength for the first time in years. No explanation, no sophisticated logic, just a woman attempting to retrace her steps after making a decision. She continued by saying, "Sierra regrets it too. According to her, things shouldn't have progressed this far. You owe no one anything," she says. I laughed a little dryly. "Mom, it's too late. Only when I quit making payments does everyone claim that I owe no one anything. My abrupt transformation into someone deserving of admiration only occurs after everything has fallen apart. That's not it. Her voice caught as she shook her head. I just wanted to let you know that I finally get it. I apologize as well. I apologize for not supporting you sooner. I stared at her for a while. I might have been softer if the apologies had been given years earlier. The wounds, however, stopped bleeding now. They were now scars. Scars also lack feeling. I responded slowly. You chose Sierra, each syllable as icy and acerbic as the wind. You advised me to keep back because Sierra was anxious when I needed a seat at the table. I paid the bills when the house was having problems, but Sierra was the one who needed consolation. You referred to my starting to live for myself as punishment. Now what? Are you asking me to bear everything once more? Tears filled her eyes as she gazed up. No, you're not being asked to return for anything. All I want you to know is that you are important, and I accept it even if you never forgive me. I took a while to reply. I slightly widened the door to let her feel the warmth behind me, not to welcome her inside. From the flat that I had independently kept warm, light, and quiet, a far cry from the place she had come from. Sincerely, I'm not angry anymore, I declared. However, I have also changed. The family doesn't depend on me to keep them together. I no longer do that, and I'm not returning. She nodded and gripped her bag tighter. I understand. I took a moment before shutting the door. We remained silent for a few more seconds, allowing the wind to blow in between our words. Then she turned away and took a step back. Her figure shrank in the snow as I watched her leave. I didn't feel as light as I had anticipated when I shut the door. However, there was also no remorse, just a cozy sense that I had made the right decision, similar to the light from the lamp in my flat. I went back to the couch, covered myself with the blanket, and started listening to the old jazz song I had stopped. For the first time in years, I realized that I didn't need permission to live my own life while the saxophone played. Snow fell in a gentle white silence throughout January. I kept up the peaceful pace I had selected while the city lay frozen in icy cold. The little heater by the window, plus the time I spent on leisurely weekends crocheting scarves, toasting bread, or reheating soup, kept my apartment warm. Mom had stopped sending messages. She hadn't visited since shortly after Thanksgiving, and I hadn't heard from her since. Not at fault. Don't beg. Not even the banal, picture-based New Year's greetings she used to send. It didn't make me sad. I was actually relieved. It wasn't a frightening silence. It felt like a breath of fresh air following a years-long storm. As though she were the last link between me and the rest of the family, Nina continued to provide me with weekly updates. Nina mentioned, I saw Sierra post asking for help on a community forum during our most recent contact. She stated she was searching for temporary lodging after losing her work, mentioned the existence of rifts in familial bonds. Deflecting the same way, I remained silent. I simply put my phone on speaker and continued to chop onions in the kitchen. The anecdote being delivered was overpowered by the aroma of sautéed onions filling the room. Uncle Mark is trying to sell his car, Nina continued. That vintage SUV is still in good operating order. I've heard that he intends to use the funds to settle some past due expenses. Aunt Claire relocated to Des Moines to live with a relative. She claimed that she needs time to reconsider how she brought up her children. Nina, on the other end, gave a sour laugh. A little late. Yeah, I simply answered, but maybe better than never realizing at all. Things that I had previously found difficult to see became more apparent as time went on. Not everyone undergoes a transformation. Furthermore, not everyone is deserving of hope. When something breaks, it's best to leave it where it fell. Like winter ice fractures, they should not be mended or walked on. Sierra was no longer on my mind every night. Stopped checking social media to see what people were saying. Furthermore, I no longer felt the need to justify my actions to the world. I really simply lived. This comfortable flat served as a reminder to me each morning that I was standing on territory I had chosen for myself, not on a precarious foundation based on the expectations of others. I went to the used bookshop across the street at the end of January. I was immediately recognized by the store owner. A cheery, "Haven't seen you in a while," he said. "You mean to brave the cold?" I chose a book on women who left their families to start over. While grinning, I sat by the fireplace, made tea with boiled water, and put the book on the table when I got home. The light flickered against the exposed brick wall as the fire flared vivid orange. I gazed into the flames while raising the wool blanket. Steady, keep quiet, enduring. Similar to me. The ancient house was probably still freezing somewhere. Perhaps their neighbors were lending them space heaters. Sierra might have been applying for aid. Perhaps my mother still bundled up in 3 blankets every night, remembering those family dinners and the individuals who had stopped wanting to eat at that table. I, on the other hand, no longer fit into that back then. In unison, the fire crackled. Steam hazed my vision as I grabbed for my tea, but my heart was clearer than ever. Winter would not end. There would be snowfall. I wouldn't be the one shivering, though, this time. Peace was my choice. I didn't regret it either. I've learned from my experience that not all blood relationships are absolutely necessary to maintain. Some borders need to be redrawn definitively after being crossed too frequently. I used to think that sacrifice equated to love. In actuality, however, selfless sacrifice merely serves to teach others to minimize your value. I no longer look to my family for approval. For myself, I live, and I've never done anything so free. And that's where I leave the story, not in bitterness, but in peace. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It's living well, growing stronger, and finally choosing yourself. If you're carrying the weight of betrayal, know this. Setting boundaries isn't cold, it's healing. You don't need to fight to be free. Just rise, let go, invest in your peace. Have you ever walked away from something that once broke you? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Let's build a space where healing begins, and revenge looks a lot like growth.